Welcome back. You're watching Nation Tonight. A move that is seen to further strain ties between the US and China. American President Joe Biden has called for curbs on US investments in China. The move is seen as a bid to deaccelerate any attempt at undermining the American national security by China. The sanctions ordered are in the field of sensitive high-tech areas that include advanced semiconductors and artificial intelligence. Joe Biden said China's tech progress poses a security threat and that this move is to limit China's access to advanced tech. Writing to the US Congress, Joe Biden highlighted that certain American investments may accelerate development of technologies in countries that develop them to counter America. Meanwhile, the sanctions are set to be implemented next year. China has also reacted to this move and said that this could affect over 70,000 companies in China and that it reserves the right to take countermeasures. So that has been so far the development when it comes to the ties between US and China. Let me take this across to my guests tonight and understand their perspective and the situation better. I'm joined by Mr. Anil Trigunayat, former ambassador and ex-trade commissioner in New York. I'm also joined by Rabinder Sachdev, President, Image India Institute. Welcome. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on Mirror Now. First to you, Ambassador Trigunayat. This, of course, comes at a time when the US-China ties are already strained, and this, of course, adds to that tense relationship that both the countries share, especially after the trade war that began between the two. But how do you see this in the context of the fact that the world is now has woken up to Chinese aggression and the fact that it's not just dangerous and it doesn't just pose a threat on ground, but even in areas such as artificial intelligence and cybersecurity?
Well, you are absolutely right. I mean, what we are witnessing is a trade war and a technology war between the United States and China. And China has acknowledged that its own supremacy, which is trying to displace the United States. And US has been just trying to slow it down somehow. According to recently, you may have seen the survey by an Australian Strategy Institute, which said that out of 44 technologies, now in 37 technologies, China has the superiority of the areas like artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and whatever we are seeing nowadays. China has been consistently working because it knows very well that the future wars, the future supremacy, future dominance is going to be through technology. So it is moving ahead and spending, investing, and creating technologies. We have seen what happened to the 5G technologies. Chinese were way ahead of the West in the beginning, and it is only through these kind of tech wars and that they were able to somehow garnish their markets as far as the Americans are concerned. So I think that this is going to further intensify. And only thing is that the Americans are saying that this is just to protect their national security. But of course, at the grassroots, we can easily see that it is happening because Americans don't want China to surpass them in technology, which is a matter of time, in my view.
Okay, Rabinder Sachdev, one of the sectors that these curbs will be put on next year onwards is the semiconductor sector. And we've seen in the past few years, especially after, the supply chain disruption and, the post-pandemic era that we are all living in, semiconductor area has been a key focus of not just the US, but countries across the world. Here in India also, we've seen a push when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing and boosting the sector, basically. Help us understand why this is important in today's time.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be with you and Ambassador Trigunayat. See, I mean, it's not only a war. Yeah, it is a war, clear cut, and a race. Now, as Ambassador Trigunayat is mentioning, the Australians are saying that out of 44 critical, Chinese are ahead in 37. I may maybe not agree, or I would have a different view. But yes, there are several technologies in which the Chinese are now ahead of America, including in AI, quantum computing, etc., and even for the naval, drones, underwater drones, etc. Now, basic point again is that America has decided it will not let China become the number one empire. And China says, I want to be the number one. If you can stop me, go ahead. That's what's happening. Now, in this race, US is looking at technology denial as one way to, impede or create hurdles for China's growth. Yes, it will create some hurdles in the short term. But what will happen is that in the next 3 to 5 years, China will catch up. China is investing heavily in, especially, let's say, semiconductors, right, and chips and these technologies. And, we can take a parallel to India. Once upon a time, India was denied the Cray computer. Remember the supercomputer? We somehow managed. It took us a long while. That was a different era. The era of today is a very fast-paced one. And China will, within 3 to 5 years, overcome this hurdle of technology denial, money denial by the US. And then what will US face? Then the US will face a China which would be ahead in these technologies at a lower cost structure. So that is the race right now. The race is also about, or the war actually is also about the standards. What will be the standards in the next 3 to 5 years on which AI, quantum computing, even the space, there is no regime in the space right now, outer space.
Yeah.
We are trying to, a few countries are trying to figure out the rules and regulations or regimes. What are the standards which will apply? The game and the battle is standards, actually. Now, that said, as far as semiconductors and chips are concerned, therein one holy grail is the smaller the size of the chip that you can make, the better you are or the more advanced you are. The machines which only Holland makes, there's only one machine in the world of that capacity, huge lithography machine, apparently costing the entire Jinping's whatever, $10 odd billion, only Holland. And then in Japan, there are two manufacturers. What America is doing today, it's only about American money not going into China to set up industries, right? But before this already started is sanctions on technologies. And Netherlands and Japan, both under American pressure or with American partnerships, have said that they're not going to export those machines. Now, those are the machines which can help a TSMC, the Taiwan giant, to make chips of the size of 6 nanometer, right? The problem for China is that China, since it was able to buy these machines from Holland and Japan, the machines to manufacture and other things, it did not invest in its own hardware to make the chips. So China had machines which could manufacture chips to the tune of 90 nanometers. But over the last 1 year, they've accelerated. And just last week, I think, China announced that it has now made a machine, their main company, which can create 28 nanometer sized chips. So China will keep on now investing to reach that holy grail of, 8 nanometer, 6 nanometer, 4 nanometer. That's where these guys are going, Samsungs of the world, etc. Right? So China will try and race towards that. So these
so Rupinder Sachdev,
sanctions,
how significant then would be the impact of US curbing investments in China? How much of that impact will be felt by China in these sectors? Number one. And number two, are we also looking at, we know that right now tech is being dominated by American companies, American giants. Do we also see a future where the world has to choose between two of the biggest threats when it comes to tech, America and China, when the world has to choose between the two?
Question for me or Ambassador?
Yes, Rubinderji, for you.
Sorry. Okay, yeah, if it's for me. Yes, we will see a world. In fact, what we will see a world in the future is a world which is going to be more or less divided into two parts. There is one world which is right now, let's say the G7 countries, America, Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia. That's one world, right? Which you can see even in their military posturing whatsoever, which is out there. And the other world will be, in terms of technology and technology standards, led by China. So it'll be up to the countries to either go with the American standards, American technologies, or with the Chinese standards, Chinese technologies, or create their own, or copy and reinvent your own. Copying is not a bad thing. All economies have grown by copying. Japan in the 1960s was known as the copying nation. Okay, America, the very foundation of America is based upon copying of textile machinery, etc., from Europe. So countries copy for their needs, they adapt and adopt. So countries in future like India especially will have to be investing much more in our R&D and technologies and then pick and choose something with the Chinese, with the Americans. The problem will be that if you buy something from the Americans, their standards, that's what I'm saying is a war of standards. Their standards, the standards of their equipments would not be compatible with the standards of the Chinese equipments that we get. It'll be something like that you go either in the Google Android world or you go with the Apple world, etc. That is where we are heading without doubt.
Hmm. Okay. Okay, Ambassador Trigunayat, help me also understand this is a very confusing stance by America because in the past, even after the spy balloon incident, we saw Antony Blinken make that China visit and we saw that there was an effort to mend ties from the side of America with China. There have been also other attempts and efforts that have been made, to really warm up the ties bit with China from the American side. But now we've also seen simultaneously this bid to bolster its position militarily, technologically, and economically that the US has been doing. Do you think it's more of, catering to domestic audiences because next year there is a presidential poll, of course, expected? Do you think it's that, or do you think America is really, trying to sort of play it both ways, whether it's bolstering ties or, also sort of cementing its position as the world number one?
Well, Shreya, in my view, this is a sort of a love-hate relationship. It is the United States which has brought China to this level, and China has taken the advantage, and now natural progression is that they want to beat the Americans at their own game. Now the Americans are trying to contain that particular posturing from them and their capabilities, the capacities, to restrict or delay it to the maximum possible, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, what has happened is that China has become very critical to the global and value supply chains. And with the Russia-Ukraine war going on the other side, which was not expected by the Americans, the whole of Western world, especially Europe, is very much stretched. And so are the Americans. And therefore, you are right, the domestic audiences, elections, and all that are, of course, going to play out on this. So that's why they changed from decoupling to de-risking. Now, and in order to do that, to smoothen that, Americans have been trying very hard to reach out to the Chinese. Now we have seen that at the Shangri-La dialogue, the American Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin wanted to have a meeting with his Chinese counterpart, but there was no meeting held because Chinese refused to meet bilaterally on that issue till the sanctions of this man. So today, China is able to call the shots. Of course, China has its own problems, domestic problems. It is facing economic downturn also at the same time. So whatever sanctions happen, we have seen the estimates of these sanctions are both because the economies are greatly integrated. Today, China happens to be the largest trading and a partner of nearly every country, major country in the world, including with India. I mean, we have about, despite our efforts to contain trade with China, we have seen that it has grown ever highest and $130 billion. Now, so that shows that if you have to grow, the dependencies are also there. For dependencies to go away, it takes a pretty long time. And there is a gestation period for that. So therefore, what the Americans are trying to do it, that somehow have a certain understanding, modus vivendi, so that the two fronts are not open. At the same time, continue to sail in both the boats. They are trying to keep them away from joining the Russians full hog in this war that is happening at the moment, so that the China does not pitch in directly and openly to help help the Russians against this war. So this is their basic strategy that they are trying to do. But there is no doubt that, like we have this competition with cooperation with China, USA also follows very similar policy as far as China is concerned.
Yeah, which is what leads me to my last question, and I want to wrap this up quickly now. I'm afraid I have paucity of time, but where does India come in all of this? How is India supposed to deal with this further strengthening of U.S.-China, bilateral trade war, or just this whole strengthening of positions by both sides? Quickly, Ambassador Trigunayat, 30 seconds.
Well, as far as India is concerned, we're definitely looking at more options. We understand the China challenge, and in my view, the China is going to be India's challenge in every geography. So we have to worry about that. And technology, of course, the technology wars or the competition is going to be the main thing in future. So India has to invest, as Dave said, in the R&D and acquire technologies that can give us certain edge. Of course, there is, like we have seen in the Apple case, there are companies that are diversifying. So we should provide that kind of a platform where they can come into India, whether it is from Taiwan, Japan, or from the United States, or moving out of China. So we should be able to provide that, and that will give us the kind of heft that we are looking at and wanting to become a part of a global and value supply chain.
Okay. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat and Robinda Sachdev, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening and sharing your perspective on the US-China ties and the latest development in the relationship. Thank you very much. Moving on, this was about US-China. Let's also get to other international